You'll never be as good as your brother. Mom sneered. I stood up and cut them off, financially. She laughed. What money? We never got anything. So I opened my folder. Receipt after receipt hit the table. She turned pale on page 1. Please subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon, so you never miss a moment like this. Your like and share can carry this story to someone who needs hope, healing, or strength today. Red Heart. My name is Marina Holt. I was 29 years old that night, and for years I had been paying for this family's survival without ever being credited for it. Something inside me cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to finally break the habit of swallowing. I pushed my chair back. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. All right, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Then tell him to take over the bills, because I'm done sending money. The room froze. My mother blinked once, slowly, then her expression hardened, like she decided I was being difficult on purpose. What money? She asked. We've never taken a cent from you. She said it calmly, confidently. For half a second, I almost doubted myself. Almost. Then every late-night transfer, every rushed payment, every time I chose their emergencies over my own life came rushing back all at once. I work with numbers, data, budgets. Numbers don't lie. People do. And when my mother erased years of financial support with one sentence, I understood something important. This was never about forgetting. This was about pretending I didn't matter. I looked at her and said, quietly, if you really want to say that out loud, then I guess I'll have to show you. Because I kept records. All of them. That was the first time her smile disappeared. Before that night, everything had looked normal from the outside. It was supposed to be a routine Sunday dinner at my parents' house in Everett, the kind of obligation that had stopped feeling optional years ago. I left my apartment in Bellevue late that afternoon with my work bag in the passenger seat because my dad always needed help with something online, and a container of homemade oatmeal cookies sliding around in the back seat because my mom liked to tell people I baked, just like her mother. Traffic crawled along the highway. Red brake lights stretched endlessly ahead. Instead of listening to music, I was mentally reviewing my bank balance. Their electricity payment was due in 3 days. I'd already covered their phone bill earlier that week. There was also a grocery charge I'd floated without thinking twice. I told myself the same thing I always did. It's fine. I can handle it. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my brother Evan's car wasn't there. Of course it wasn't. Being dependable was my role. Being late was his. I walked in, set the cookies on the counter, and my mom, Sandra, kissed my cheek quickly. Right on time, Mari, she said. You always are. My reliable one. Reliable. It sounded less like affection and more like an assignment. My dad, Thomas, was already seated at the dining table, glasses low on his nose, scrolling on his laptop. Bills were scattered beside him, along with a calculator that never seemed to leave that spot. Hey, kiddo, he said without looking up. Remind me later. I need you to help me reset something. I nodded automatically. Aunt Lydia was there too, folding napkins neatly and talking about someone at her office who'd just gotten promoted. There she is, she said brightly. Always working. Always busy. You must be doing so well for yourself. People always said that. Because I didn't complain, dinner unfolded exactly the way it always did. My mother talked about Evan's momentum, a social media post that got attention, a potential client he was about to close, a lifestyle he earned. My dad nodded along. Aunt Lydia chimed in with comments about charisma and confidence. Whenever my name came up, it was the same recycled phrases. She's stable. She's fine. She has a solid job. as if that covered everything. No one mentioned the transfers that kept their internet on. No one mentioned the money I sent when prices got overwhelming. No one mentioned that Evan had called me just weeks earlier asking for help because business was slow right now. When Evan finally arrived, late, holding a cheap bottle of wine like it was a trophy, the energy shifted instantly. Everyone leaned toward him. I watched, quiet, thinking about the message my mom had sent 2 days earlier asking if I could just help this once with another bill. That part never made it into the dinner conversation. At one point, my dad laughed and said, "Evan's basically the man of the house now." Everyone chuckled. My mom smiled proudly. "He just has that spark. Everything works out for him." Then she looked at me and said the thing she'd never said so plainly before. "You'll never be as good as your brother." The table went quiet for half a beat. Then laughter again. That was when years of small dismissals finally lined up into something undeniable. This hadn't started that night. It started years earlier, when I was 24, fresh out of grad school, barely settled into my first real job. My dad had called, voice low, embarrassed. A storm, a repair, a shortfall. "Could you spot us $180 just this once?" he asked. "We'll pay you back." I said yes. They never did, but the requests didn't stop. They multiplied. Utilities, insurance, groceries, emergency gaps. Eventually, I stopped being asked and started being assumed. I built my life around their shortages. I postponed my own plans. I told myself that being needed meant being loved. And that night, sitting at that table, watching my contribution be erased while my brother was crowned the hero, I finally saw the truth clearly. I had never been unreliable. I had been invisible. The truth is, I didn't wake up one morning and decide to become my family's backup plan. It happened quietly, so quietly that by the time I noticed, the role had already fused to me. After that dinner, I drove home in silence. No music, no podcasts, just the sound of the road and my own thoughts, looping like a bad voicemail I couldn't delete. "You'll never be as good as your brother." It wasn't the cruelty of the sentence that haunted me. It was how easily it had been said, like a fact everyone already agreed on. When I got home, I dropped my bag by the door and opened my laptop. I didn't even take off my shoes. I logged into my banking app. I don't know what I expected. Maybe to prove myself wrong. Maybe to find some exaggeration in my memory. Instead, the numbers stared back at me, exact and merciless. Transfers going back years. Small ones at first. $75 here. $120 there. Then larger amounts. $340 for a car repair. $620 when the heating system failed unexpectedly. $1,150 spread across 3 payments during a month my mom called tight. I scrolled and scrolled. By the time I reached the earliest entries, my hands were shaking. I hadn't just helped. I had subsidized. What stunned me most wasn't the total, it was the pattern. The timing of payments lined up with messages I remembered perfectly. "Can you help just this once?" "We're embarrassed to ask." "You're the only one we can rely on." I closed my laptop and leaned back against the couch, staring at the ceiling. I had built my adulthood around being dependable, and somewhere along the way, my family learned they didn't have to carry their own weight, as long as I was nearby. It really started when I was 24. I just landed my first stable position at a mid-sized analytics firm. Nothing glamorous, but steady. Health insurance. A predictable paycheck. The kind of job parents brag about without understanding. My dad called me on a Tuesday evening. His voice was tight, restrained. The way it always was when he felt ashamed. The insurance premium jumped. He said, "We weren't expecting it. Just this month is rough." I remember pacing my tiny apartment, phone pressed to my ear, nodding like he could see me. "How much?" I asked. "About $210. He replied, "We'll get it back to you." I sent the money before he finished the sentence. I didn't think twice. A week later, my mom texted, "Thank you again. Don't tell your brother. We don't want him worrying." That line stuck with me, not because it felt kind, because it felt intentional. From then on, the requests didn't come as emergencies anymore. They came as expectations wrapped in soft language. When I got a raise, my mom knew before I'd even told my friends. When I paid off my student loans, my dad asked if I felt lighter now. When Evan's freelance income dipped, my phone buzzed with concern, not for me, but for how stressful it must be for him. Somewhere in those years, my mother started doing something I didn't fully notice at first. She stopped asking. Instead, she told, "The electric bill is due Friday. We're short this month. I'll send you the amount later." And I paid, because arguing felt cruel, because saying no felt like betrayal, because I'd been trained slowly, expertly, to equate compliance with love. What I didn't know at the time was that the money wasn't the worst part. It was the paperwork. It began with something that sounded harmless. My mom called one afternoon, her voice bright in that artificial way she used when she wanted something. "Sweetheart, your credit score is excellent," she said. "Ours is complicated right now." I already knew where this was going. "There's a short-term lease situation," she continued. "Just temporary. It would help us stabilize while your father sorts out some things." I hesitated. "What does that mean?" I asked. "Well, we just need to put your name down as the responsible party," she said lightly. "No risk. You're not even paying. It's just a formality." A formality. That was the word she always used when she wanted me to ignore my instincts. I said yes. I always did. I didn't realize then that this wasn't about a lease. It was about control. My name began appearing on documents I didn't initiate. Enrollment forms, utility accounts, service agreements. Whenever I asked questions, I was met with annoyance. "Why are you being difficult? We already explained this. Do you not trust us?" Trust. That word became a weapon. I trusted them so much that I didn't notice how often my identity was being stretched, borrowed, reshaped to solve problems that weren't mine. And the more I complied, the more invisible I became. At family gatherings, Evan was praised for ambition. I was praised for availability. "She's always there," my mom would say proudly. "She never complains." They said it like a compliment. I heard it like a warning. Back in my apartment that night, I opened my messages. There it was. A text from my mom sent just hours before dinner. "Can you send $480 tonight?" Something came up. I stared at it for a long time. Then I did something I'd never done before. I didn't respond. The silence felt unnatural. My phone buzzed again 10 minutes later. "Did you see my message?" I put the phone face down, on the table. For the first time in years, I didn't rush to soothe anyone else's anxiety. And in that stillness, something unsettling clicked into place. They didn't see me as a daughter. They saw me as infrastructure. And infrastructure isn't thanked. It's only noticed when it fails. That realization hurt more than any insult ever had. But it also did something else. It woke me up. I didn't confront anyone the next day, or the day after that. I needed time, not to cool off, but to see clearly. Anger blurs things. I wanted precision, so I did what I always did when something didn't make sense. I investigated. The morning after dinner, I took a sick day from work. I brewed coffee I barely tasted and opened my laptop at the kitchen table. Sunlight spilled through the blinds. but it felt like I was sitting under a spotlight. I logged into my credit monitoring account. I hadn't checked it in months. There'd never been a reason to. My score had always been solid, boringly responsible. On-time payments, low utilization, clean history. Until it wasn't. A new account sat there, bold and unmistakable. Consumer installment loan, opened 11 months ago. My chest tightened. I clicked. The balance wasn't enormous, but it wasn't small either, $14,870. My name was on it, my social security number, my address. But the payments weren't coming from my account. They were irregular, sometimes late, sometimes partial. And the lender's contact address? My parents' home. I stared at the screen, trying to reconcile what I was seeing with the version of reality I'd been living in. I hadn't taken out a loan. I hadn't signed anything. Yet here it was, quietly siphoning my future, one missed payment at a time. I felt sick. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I took screenshots. Then I pulled every statement I could find. The deeper I went, the worse it got. Utility accounts, in my name with addresses I hadn't lived at in years. A vehicle registration I didn't recognize, registered under my identity, insured under my parents' policy. Enrollment paperwork for an online certification program I'd never heard of. All legitimate. All mine. On paper. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled slowly. This wasn't careless help gone wrong. This was systematic. I thought back to all the times my mom had brushed me off when I asked questions. It's just temporary. You're overthinking. Do you want us to fail? This was never about convenience. It was about access. My credit. My name. My silence. They hadn't just taken money. They'd taken my identity and used it as collateral for their lifestyle. And suddenly, the way they'd spoken to me made sense. Why they dismissed my concerns. Why they avoided details. Why everything felt deliberately vague. They didn't want gratitude. They wanted continuity. My credit. My name. My silence. They hadn't just taken money. They'd taken my identity and used it as collateral for their lifestyle. And suddenly, the way they'd spoken to me made sense. Why they dismissed my concerns. Why they avoided details. Why everything felt deliberately vague. They didn't want gratitude. They wanted continuity. I called the lender. It took 20 minutes to get through to a human. Yes, the representative confirmed after verifying my information. The loan was finalized last spring. Signature on file. I didn't sign anything. I said flatly. There was a pause. Well, the documentation indicates consent. She replied. Would you like me to email you the agreement? Yes, I said. Immediately, when the email arrived, my hands went cold. The signature wasn't mine. It was a decent imitation, but it leaned too hard on the curves, exaggerated the loops. Someone had studied it, practiced. I knew exactly who. I closed my eyes. Images rushed back. My mom watching me sign birthday cards, laughing about how fancy my handwriting was. I felt violated in a way I couldn't articulate. This wasn't just financial betrayal. This was theft dressed up as motherhood. I drove to my parents' house that afternoon. I didn't call ahead. I needed to see their faces. My dad answered the door, surprised. Marina, he said, what are you doing here? We need to talk, I replied. Inside, everything looked the same. The same couch, the same framed family photos where Evan was always centered, and I was always cropped slightly to the side. My mom came in from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. Is everything okay? She asked. I didn't sit down. I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table between us. What's this? I asked. She glanced at the screen, then away. That's nothing, she said quickly. Why are you snooping around your credit again? I tapped the screen. A $14,870 loan in my name. Opened 11 months ago. Signed by someone who clearly isn't me. The air shifted. My dad cleared his throat. Well, my mom said slowly, "We were going to tell you." I laughed. It came out sharp and humorless. When? I asked. After it defaulted? Her expression hardened. "Don't be dramatic," she snapped. "We needed flexibility. And you weren't using your credit for anything important." Something in me snapped at the word using, as if my life were a storage unit she could access whenever she ran out of space. "You forged my signature," I said. "Do you understand what that is?" She crossed her arms. "I raised you," she said. "You owe us." There it was. Not gratitude, not apology, entitlement. I left without another word. I drove until my hands stopped shaking. By the time I reached my apartment, the path forward was clear. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to demand repayment and hope for compliance. I was going to document everything, because if they were willing to steal my identity and erase my contribution, then I wasn't dealing with family anymore. I was dealing with criminals who assumed love would protect them from consequences. They were wrong. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what would happen next. I was focused. I didn't warn them. That was the hardest part and the most necessary. Every instinct I had screamed to announce my next move, to demand explanations, to give them one final chance to do the right thing. That was the version of me they were used to, the one who softened blows before they landed. But this time, I stayed silent, because silence, when backed by evidence, is louder than any confrontation. The morning after I found the forged signature, I sat at my desk with a legal pad and wrote one sentence at the top of the page. Facts only, no emotions, no history, no family context, just dates, amounts, documents. I created a timeline. March 14th, online loan application submitted. March 16th, loan approved for $14,870. April, December, inconsistent payments from a non-listed bank account. January 9th, first late mark reported to Credit Bureau. I attached screenshots, statements, email confirmations. IP logs were available. Then I did something I'd never done before. I filed an identity theft report. The officer on the phone was calm, methodical. He asked if I suspected anyone. Yes, I said, a close family member. There was a brief pause. That's unfortunately common, he replied. You're doing the right thing. Those words hit harder than I expected. The right thing, not the cruel thing, not the ungrateful thing. The right thing. Once the report was filed, the process took on a life of its own. I didn't have to convince anyone. I didn't have to plead my case. The system doesn't care about family roles or emotional leverage. It cares about proof. And I had plenty. The lender froze the account pending investigation. The late marks were flagged. A fraud specialist reached out for additional documentation. Each email I received felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life get untangled, but it was mine. And for once, I wasn't the one doing all the work to keep things together. 3 days later, my phone rang. It was my mother. I didn't answer. She called again and again. Then the text started. What did you do? We just got a letter. Call me right now. I stared at the screen, heart racing, but I didn't respond. An hour later, my dad called. His voice, when I finally picked up, was shaking. Why are there investigators asking questions? He demanded. Do you have any idea what you've done? Yes, I said calmly. I reported fraud. You didn't have to take it this far. He snapped. We're family. I closed my eyes. You stopped being family when you signed my name without my consent. I replied. He hung up. That night, Evan showed up at my apartment. I hadn't told him anything, not yet, but clearly the fallout had reached him. He looked uncomfortable, like he'd been dragged into something he didn't want to understand. You blindsided them, he said. Mom's freaking out. I leaned against the counter and crossed my arms. She committed a crime. I said, what part of that is confusing? He scoffed. Come on. It was just paperwork. They needed help. No, I corrected. They needed my identity. He shifted uncomfortably. Well, you're fine financially. You always are. That sentence, that casual dismissal, it confirmed everything. I'm fine because I plan my life. I said, not because I'm available to fix theirs. He didn't respond. Instead, he tried something else. You're going to tear this family apart, he said quietly. I met his eyes. No, I replied. I'm just refusing to hold it together by myself. He left without another word. Over the next few weeks, things escalated quickly. Investigators requested in-person interviews. The forged signature was flagged. Digital timestamps didn't align with my location records. My mother stopped calling. Then, abruptly, she tried a different tactic. An email. It was long, emotional, carefully crafted. She wrote about sacrifice, about everything she'd given up for me, about how this was all a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. She didn't apologize. She asked me to retract the report. I forwarded the email to the investigator. That was the last time I engaged directly. The real confrontation happened somewhere unexpected. Not at home. Not over the phone. Not in a screaming match like I'd imagined for years. It happened in a bland conference room at a mediation office downtown. Neutral walls. A ticking clock. A long table separating truth from denial. My mother sat across from me, eyes red but posture rigid. My father beside her, silent. The mediator reviewed the findings. Forged signature. Unauthorized accounts. Misrepresentation. Each point landed like a controlled detonation. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I said one sentence. I trusted you with my name, and you treated it like a tool. My mother finally looked at me then, not with anger, with calculation. And in that moment, I knew something important. I hadn't just protected myself. I had disrupted a system that relied on my compliance. The confrontation at the dinner table was only the beginning of something much bigger, a shift I never expected but desperately needed. After I laid out all the receipts, all the evidence of how much I had silently carried for years, the room froze. My mother's face turned pale, and my father struggled for words. My aunt shifted uncomfortably, and my brother looked at me like I had suddenly become an enemy. It wasn't just about the money. It was about breaking the story they had told for years, the story where my brother, Lucas, was the golden child, the one who carried the family forward, while I, Camille, was just the dependable background. The days that followed were filled with tense silences and cold shoulders. My phone lit up with calls I ignored from my mom, Denise pleading and angry from my dad, Mark confused and hurt, and from Lucas throwing accusations and insults. The family narrative was unraveling, and I was at the center of it. Denise accused me of dramatizing, of making a mountain out of molehills. Mark reminded me that families don't keep score. Lucas called me obsessive and said I was making things worse. But I knew better. I had the numbers, the facts, the truth. I canceled all the automatic transfers I'd set up for years. The power bills, the internet, the insurance, all gone. Instead, I started building something for myself, a savings account just for me, an emergency fund, a retirement plan I'd put off for years. For the first time, I wasn't just patching holes in their lives. I was investing in my future. The backlash was brutal. My mom posted vague, hurtful messages on social media about ungrateful children. My cousins liked them, unknowingly taking sides. Lucas's online persona shifted. The flashy lifestyle gave way to more humble posts, but the tension between us was real. My parents took on jobs they never wanted, struggling but learning to stand on their own 2 feet. Meanwhile, I found freedom in boundaries. I started saying no without guilt. I treated myself to dinners without calculating the cost in my head. I signed up for a yoga class and joined a running group. I booked a trip to the coast, something I'd postponed for years. Slowly, I reclaimed parts of myself that had been lost in the weight of their expectations. At family dinners now, the atmosphere was different. There was no more talk of who was carrying who. Instead, there was a quiet understanding, unspoken but real. They didn't ask me to cover bills anymore. I didn't feel invisible or taken for granted. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. I still love my family. I always will. But I won't let that love cost me my peace. And if you're listening and recognize the pattern, if you're the one always giving but never receiving thanks, maybe it's time to ask yourself, what would your life look like if you finally stopped paying for someone else's story and started investing in your own? After setting those boundaries, my life began to shift in ways I hadn't dared to imagine before. Instead of my days revolving around making sure my parents' bills were paid, I started focusing on what I wanted, not what I was expected to do. I enrolled in that certification course I'd been putting off for years, the one that could finally push my career forward. My boss noticed the change in me, how more confident I sounded during meetings, how I volunteered for bigger projects. I started updating my resume, dreaming about promotions, and even considered applying for jobs in other cities. The idea of a fresh start felt exhilarating. On weekends, I swapped worry for joy. I joined a local running club where no one knew me as the family ATM or the responsible daughter. I was just Mia, someone training for her first 10K. The friends I made there didn't ask about my family drama or my bank transfers. They asked about my favorite routes and my running playlist. One Saturday, I booked a small trip to the coast, a vacation I hadn't taken in years because I was always putting others first. Standing on the beach, the wind in my hair and the ocean stretching out before me, I realized how small my world had been, centered around other people's problems. Family dinners didn't disappear, but the tone changed. There was no more expectation that I'd fix everything or cover the bills. My parents talked more openly about their new part-time jobs and the challenges they faced. My brother, Lucas, was quieter, less showy, maybe humbled by the reality we all had to face. We still had tough conversations, but they weren't battles. They were talks about figuring things out together. Honestly, I still love my family deeply, but now I love myself too. I've learned that love doesn't mean sacrificing your future or your peace of mind. It means setting boundaries, speaking your truth, and knowing when to say no. If you're hearing this and feeling the weight of being the family's silent supporter, the one who always gives but rarely gets, remember this. Your worth isn't tied to how much you sacrifice. Your value isn't measured by how many bills you pay or favors you do. It lives in the life you build for yourself, the boundaries you set, and the respect you demand. I am Mia Johnson, and I am done being invisible. I am done letting others rewrite my story. I am choosing me, and that has made all the difference. Thank you for listening.